Hello, everyone, and welcome to the OpenChain monthly meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and before we formally get started, I am going to show our antitrust policy notice. As always, if you have any questions about our antitrust policy, you can contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove. And of course, you can read the full policy on our website. We show this before every meeting. Today is a bit of a packed agenda. We have a lot going on. So let's dive right into it. Every meeting is structured in the same way. We have a workflow as shown on this slide. The idea is to make sure that our meetings are consistent and deliver known value every time. That said, these are not static meetings. They are designed to provide a forum for interactive editing and stuff like that. In this particular meeting, we will be doing some work around our standards and around our reference material. Before we do that, let's do a quick round robin of introductions. We'll do this in alphabetical order. If you click on the participant list, you can see who's there. Just name and company, or if you're one of our chair people or ex-chair people, please identify yourself as such. So I'm Shane. I'm the general manager at the OpenChain project.
So hello, Andreas Beck from Wärtsilä and product security manager.
Andrew from Orco and Moorcrofts. Sorry, I think everyone's list is in a slightly different order, so apologies for that.
Hello, my name is Stefan Hastinteufel, and I'm from Witzel at Baku, and just a very new member to the OpenChain. This is my first time with that meeting, so I'm very excited how this is taking place. Thank you.
Welcome. Alan, I think you were just trying to introduce yourself, so
yeah, Ali Trapala from Sony.
Great to have you here. I'll call out some names to unmute, so that'll help deal with our weird lists. Anna, how about you?
Hello, Shane. Thank you very much. It's Anna Schumann from KPMG Germany. I'm a member from OpenChain for quite a long time, but first time, I think, with my clear name. So I've been reading the messages for quite a long while.
Well, it's great to have you here, Anna. Gail.
Hi, Gail McCommons. I represent the Comcast Open Source Program Office on the OpenChain Governing Board.
Great to have you here. Gerald.
Hi, colleagues. This is Gerald from Pretoria. I've been working with my colleague Lafuna, so we are very excited about what you guys are doing, and we hope we can bring this project to Southern Africa.
Excellent, Gerald. Great to have you on the line and great to talk again. Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob Wilson, longtime member of the group, consumer of the standard, want to take a more active role in the community, recently transitioned from the security assurance consulting space to the financial sector. Gemini Trust, I'm US based.
Good to have you here, and it's always good to have some security experts as we dive deeper into that domain. Nathan.
Yeah, hi, this is Nathan Kumagai, worked for Qualcomm, formerly the onboarding chair and now serving the education work team now.
Mark.
Hi, I'm Marquisi with Wind River, and I've been the chair of the SPEC since its founding, but I will be passing on the torch soon, and I'm looking forward to supporting the SPEC going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Sakshi.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sakshi, and I work for Source Code Control Limited. And yeah, we are very much OpenChain enthusiasts. And right now we are developing a course on OSPO, just to give a brief introduction. Yeah, thank you.
Good to have you here. Shinji.
Hello, everyone.
That's it.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good
Oh.
evening, and good midnight. This is SC.
Hi, SC.
Yep. So I work for BV, and I also participate in the OpenChain Java working group. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, SC. And it's very late there. Thank you for being here. Stefan. No problem. Moving on, Stephen.
Hi all, Stephen Kilbane. I'm based in Edinburgh. I'm working for Analog Devices, and I'm possibly going to be the new chair of the spec. We shall see.
Good to have you here. And nearly last but not least, Trent.
Hello all, Trent Allgood from Angle Point.
Good to have you here. Umo.
Yeah, hi, I'm from Zeiss company. I'm just swapped over here from the toolchain working group. Just wanted to look what you're doing here.
Excellent. Good to have you here. And finally, Hillary. So Hillary, welcome to the call. Hillary's our board representative from Google. All right, everyone, let's dive.
Stefan, and I think I missed your call, but I introduced myself like in the very beginning. So I think we're just with first name, so Stefan is fine. Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Thank you, Stefan. And it's good to have you all here. It's going to be a busy meeting. Let's move into our news to get things rolling. Now, Mark mentioned that we are about to rotate formally our specification chair. This is going to be the first time that we've done this rotation, and it's an important inflection point for the project. The idea here is that for each of our working groups and for the project as a whole, we're introducing elections and board rotations, which allows us to have different chair people take over and continuity year by year. So Mark, our founding chair of the specification work group, will formally pass the leadership torch before the end of this year. Now, moving forward, we're going to look for two people to act as specification chairs. The idea here is to have potentially two different domain experience available, one person biased towards license compliance, one person biased towards security, because we have a specification for each, and also to allow redundancy. This is obviously an important part of the project because we are actively doing work around the specifications. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, being a chair of our specifications does not require some form of specialized experience, but there are a few things that are very useful. One, be from a company that is using open source. So actually have domain experience in using this in the supply chain and the challenges involved. It's important that our project is always based on users rather than, for instance, abstract approaches or vendor approaches. We want to be the companies who are solving problems for themselves, developing the standards to do so. Two, have domain knowledge in license compliance or security assurance. Both are super valuable. You don't need to have knowledge in both, but one or the other is very valuable. Be detail focused and unbiased. Ultimately, the chair of the specification work group is helping capture all the input, and the job is about doing so, having a critical eye to take notes and make comments, but making sure that every voice is heard. And that leads to the final point, have experience building consensus in community discussions. We are an open source project. Instead of code, we make standards, but we do it in the open source way. So everything is community based. The stuff that the chairs will do is participate in our monthly community calls, i.e. this call, help lead the segment of this call, reviewing open issues or accepting new issues around the specifications. You'll see that in a few minutes as we do it on this call. Make judgment calls about what is included in the edit cycle. Essentially, this is something where Mark acted as a wonderful gateway to capture ideas that fit into our parameters for the spec and to ensure that ideas that didn't fit in were addressed as such. Now, of course, the spec's final iteration is based on a vote by the steering committee. So the chair doesn't get to write the final spec per se, but they get to help guide the community towards the draft that goes to the steering committee that decides if we go ahead or not. coordinate with the general manager to finalize editing. In other words, I'll be taking heavy lifting on that stuff, and participate in our steering committee meetings in the future. That's 4 per year. Basically, the steering committee meetings happen beside the board meetings, and that's where we do a vote. Do we add this to the spec? Do we not add, etc., etc.? Right. So if you want to be part of this, how do you nominate yourself? Just by sending an email to our specification mailing list. That's our single source of truth, where we decide what's happening around the spec. Right now, we do actually have 2 people nominated. So we have Steve Kilbane and also Jacob Wilson have self-nominated for this position. There are 2 open slots, but don't let that prevent you from also nominating yourself if you want to be one of our specification chairs. We do have an election process. 2 spots available. If 2 or fewer people are nominated before November 15th, then they will become the spec chair with a 1-year term. If more than 2 people are nominated, an election will be triggered, and that will take place by email between the 15th and 22nd of November. Chairs can be re-elected in a year ahead, and that means we can have nice, strong continuity as we go. Of course, we may adjust this process in the future, but that's what we're running with right now as we do our first chair rotation around this. Now, I wanted to pause here and call Mark in because obviously as the spec chair around all of this, you've guided us from having a blank piece of document into actually editing something that became an ISO spec over 2 generations. And I was wondering if you could provide some insight into how that was structured. And we have some formal material on the website, but I thought it might be good for you to explain how you approached it as a chair, what kind of parameters you put on it, and you know how that essentially guided people in doing the right thing. Now, I'm just going to put a link into our chat. That link is now in the chat, and that contains the formal update procedure, which essentially is, I'm just switching my screen share very briefly, that stuff.
Yeah, if you can keep that up, Shane, I can use this as a guide to help people understand the process. So this has been put together by the actual group or the working group, and it's something that can evolve over time, but it's the process we've been following thus far. One thing I wanted to point out that this has been an effort we've received contributions from over several hundred people. So this spec has been this great community effort. And one of the challenges when you're dealing with so many people is to make sure that we hear all the ideas, but we put them into a framework that will help us guide us on selecting the ideas that fit best to what we intend to achieve here. So one of the first things is it's something in the first item. It says we have a set of guiding principles, which is found on the FAQ. Really quick summary. There basically it says this is really focused on building trust in the in open source, from which our solutions are built from, right? And the other principle is that we focus on the what and why, in not the how and when. We don't give specifics on how to do things, but more high-level requirements. Like, for example, you must produce a bill of materials for the open source in your offering, right? But we don't explain or provide any specifics on how to do that. We want that flexibility there. The third item is that we want this to be a very straightforward and practical guide, and we have a notion of less is more as our third principle, where we basically are saying, let's keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? And then fourth one is basically we function as an open source project, even though we're developing a standard stock. So those are our guiding principles. And whenever we have a decision to be made, we'll go back to those guiding principles and make sure the decision that's being made for the content of the spec is consistent with those guiding principles. Keep in mind also that those guiding principles can be evolved over time. That's up to this group as well, the working group. And that's what we try to do when we kick off the next version of a spec. We'll come back and say, do they still make sense? Or should we alter them? Okay, that's really the first item here, right? And I think that's a very important item to keep a consistency going. Then from there, We will then gather up feedback as we go through the process, and the mailing list is a core place of getting that feedback, also the meetings that we hold. And essentially, all that information that we gather for feedback is collected up and stored in the GitHub issues tracking list, so that we have people make comments on it, and we can track what discussions were carried out around which items. And then what we'll try to do through the process, moving up to item 5 here, we'll have a draft of the spec, and they'll be out there on a new version will be put out on a monthly basis while that process is going on. Then they'll go through it. Finally, we'll have a 6-week period where we'll put it out for final review. And then we'll say, all right, 2 weeks prior to what we intend to ship it in the doc, we'll say, all right, this is frozen. And if there's no real hard, disagreements, we'll then proceed to finalize it. If there are some issues in the 14 days, we can always start the cycle again. But the basic point here is that we have this process we've been following, and I think that's we'll do continuing forward. But again, this is something that can evolve based on working group feedback. That's it.
Mark, that is fantastic. And I think one of the great things, you hit the nail on the head on the spec guiding principles. Let's see if we can pull this up on the wiki.
So
okay. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, this idea of avoiding to boil the ocean, focus carefully, and the what and the why, avoid the how and the when. This stuff seems to me to be critical as the overarching principles that set the right tone for us. Would you agree that might be the correct way to phrase them?
Are you asking me or anybody?
Of course, Mr. Chairperson.
No. For now, they've worked as long as people can understand them. But if people feel they want to provide that feedback, this is a good time to do that at the beginning of a new rev.
Absolutely. And all of this material, of course, everyone is available on our website, and it will be available for you as we go into the next phase. And I'm going to touch on that very briefly here, just flagging that under the spec item, today is when we begin the editing cycle. We're going to update our ISO standard for license compliance. So this is known as OpenChain 2.1. And we're going to start working on the 3rd generation, so 3.0 today. This will result probably in an ISO standard update around 2024. Now that might sound like a long time, but later in this call, we'll go into the details of why that's so. And we'll be updating our security assurance reference specification, which, yes, we've just started promoting, but we're going to start working on the 2nd generation today as the 1st generation goes through ISO. Again, that won't result in something immediate. It will result in something in 2023 to maybe early 2024. The reasons will be explored later in more detail, but basically it takes a while to edit a spec. And what we're doing today, kicking off the editing cycle, is giving people an opportunity to start putting down notes and debating changes, including changes on scope and so on. And those conversations take a while. Mark, just spitballing here, I think the first version of our spec took something like a year or 18 months to write. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes, we had and we were starting from ground zero, but we had a draft of a previous working group, but there was a lot of discussion that went on, and it's important to have that discussion and let everybody speak, right?
Absolutely. And if I remember our notes, there were around 200 people, a little over 200 people that contributed to the original document that became ISO 5230. So it was a significant effort.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. All right, we're going to come back to the spec item in a minute. Before we do that, I'm going to go through some of the news following our normal agenda. Let's hit some SBOM news. Here's some updates from the SPDX project. There are a couple of things that you may want to pay attention to. One, SPDX 2.3 is out. You can find the link on the slides, which are being displayed here, but I sent the mailing list already. They have a monthly call very soon, this Thursday, and that's where they'll be discussing the 3rd generation of their specification. So that's going to be interesting if you're interested in software bill of materials, particularly with things like the 3rd version of their specification leaning more heavily into security There's always calls around the SPDX project on Thursdays, and you can join them just like you can join our calls. Just turn up. Final item from Kate, the new test suite for checking libraries being incorporated into their repo. In other words, SPDX is not just doing their spec, they're also doing tooling and so on that helps with utilizing their spec for software bill of materials. Busy project, they're older than OpenChain. They've done fantastic work. It's a sister project. And of course, we try to work closely with them to make sure everyone can easily move from our high-level process management into their slightly lower level software bill of materials and so on. Moving on, OSPO news. We have some news from the To-Do project. So To-Do Group and Chaos have been working together on an OSPO metrics working group. Could be good to check in if you're interested on the metric sides of things. They've got a community survey out, which will help guide their OSPO work next year. There will be, speaking of next year, another OSPology live event in the Netherlands, this time public sector and energy focus. And they will have a community call in mid-November about the automation of policies and processes with our good friend Thomas, who's also in our automation work group. That discussion from Thomas may be of particular interest because we are seeing more and more automation used. And of course, process automation directly relates to what we're doing with license compliance and security. Speaking of security, let's have a look at OpenSSF. This is a big thanks to David Wheeler over there. He provided some news. So a bunch of items. SigStore has general availability of the SigStore Con. It's a service you'll find online, and I do suggest you check out the link in the slides. The Alpha Omega Foundation, which is designed to provide capital to improve security, is doing stuff around JavaScript. More generically, and I think from our optic immediately interesting, the OpenSSF scorecards have been validated as being effective to assess project security. And of course, we have some information about how OSPOs can help with security. And adjacent to that, and outside of the OpenSSF project itself, some report from the commercial vendor side of things with Sonatype's State of the Software Supply Chain report. All of that is useful and ties neatly into what we do around security, which is very high-level process approach. Automation news, we have a bit. We've had some exciting stuff, big thanks to Jan especially. The capability map of our automation work group has been updated, and the Open API definition for what would be a minimal requirement for an API that fits into this capability model is also updated. What's that about? This is it. The automation work group has been looking at what is the stuff you need to do to have automation solving many different problems. And they've been making notes about that. They've been building an API information structure that would address that. This is work that allows us to assess how open source tooling for open source compliance is working. It also allows us to assess how proprietary tools are working and to see if they fit into the model. If that sounds interesting, get involved. The automation work group is one of our most active. They have a first Wednesday meeting in November. It'll be at 9 a.m. UTC +1. And it will be third Wednesday in November at 3 p.m. UTC +1. They use a different room to our other room. They are at the FSFE conference bridge. You can click and join there, and you can join the automation mailing list as well. Highly recommended if you're looking at ways to accelerate your compliance activities. Now, back to this slide. The model is not currently addressing security or export control, but that means the discussion is in play. So if you're interested in automation and security or automation and export control, drop in, talk with the people, see what they're doing, and see if maybe that map could be updated to help address your use case. Okay, let's swing back to our more interactive section. Work on standards and core material. this is coming before we move to work on reference material. And this is where we'll begin to talk about how we're going to update our ISO standards. So let's have a look at what's in play. Right. Setting the tone. We're going to work on updating our standards, formally starting today. This does not mean that our ISO standard for license compliance or our de facto standard for security assurance are outdated. The current versions can and should continue to be used in procurement and other negotiations. They are valid for your supply chain, and they will continue to be valid. But as an open source project, it's very important that we are really inclusive in making sure that people are ready to give us ideas for the future. So we're formally looking for those future ideas and suggestions. We want to make sure that every stakeholder that is interested is involved in developing the next generation of our standards. The actual updates of the standards will be a little bit later. So you can expect around 2024 for the ISO standard for license compliance to get an update, and around 2023, the ISO standard for security assurance to get an update. This means that in the current market, you can expect our ISO standard for license compliance to be in play for around 2 more years. And given that our ISO standard for security assurance will be released middle 2023, you will be still able to use our de facto standard for quite a while before that. Getting involved in editing is pretty simple. We've spent time in the background to make this as easy as possible. Our specifications are now on GitHub in Markdown. Let me show you exactly what that means. I'm just switching over here to GitHub, and you'll see here that on our GitHub, there is our license compliance specification. And I'm just putting this in our chat. There we go. This specification is formatted in what's called Markdown, which is basically a way of using text with a few small tags for simple formatting. We can convert this into PDF documents and so on and so forth. As well as having that, we have created very simple ways to add an issue. If you want to say something about the license compliance specification, you can submit a bug report if you see a problem. You can send an improvement suggestion or ask a question by clicking a one button. Let's just do, let's say, ask a question. You click that, and there are clear instructions of what to do, and you just click Submit New Issue. As we receive issues, they are stored online here. You'll see that right now for license compliance, we actually have 12 open issues. Bang. Every time we get an idea, we see it recorded here, and then we can address it on these calls and on our mailing list, and everyone can permanently see what's going on. Here's an example, just opening the first one. This is an old submission, and this is how we do it. We capture them, and over time, we enter editing cycles like this one, and we go through them. This is a submission from our good friend Marcel, and he's just noting that we could combine 2 of the items in the current ISO standard for license compliance. It's an important thing to consider. It's an important thing to discuss, and we will do that in future calls. I'm just pausing here. I saw a note from Jacob that the move to Markdown is amazing. Thank you, Jacob. I think it will be significantly useful for us. The fact that we can go through the standard like this, the fact that we can then just click and the chairs or myself can edit the standard quickly to update it is going to be able to help improve our speed, improve our translations, and allow us to make this available to more people more quickly. Now, the license compliance spec is not the only one that's getting this makeover. Security assurance is doing the same. Our security assurance spec is due to be an ISO standard around mid-2023. This update will be to the specs ISO standard around 2024. The current spec is on GitHub. That de facto standard is what's going into ISO as generation 1. So if people adopt the de facto standard today for security assurance, they'll automatically conform to the ISO standard in 2023. Meanwhile, we'll begin editing the next generation, which will be an ISO standard around mid-2024. Let's have a look over to GitHub and see what we've got. So on GitHub, the security assurance specification is just like the license one. All of the document is stored on GitHub. You can get chunks of it and copy paste into your issues, no problem. Just like with the license compliance spec, you can see the open issues really easily, and you can submit a new issue using that fancy interface as well. This, as always, allows people to pick up any problems, describe them quickly, and for us to include them in these calls. This editing process is going to be a big deal, and I think you'll find that it allows us to adjust the license compliance spec and adjust the security assurance spec very quickly. We'll be able to get more feedback, edit quickly on live calls, and provide that feedback to our community at large almost in real time. And we'll be able, where necessary, to translate it into multiple languages, not just the completed specs, but also to translate important changes, to make sure that our community in places like China, Japan, Korea is able to read those changes and contribute back, even if they don't happen to be English speakers. In other words, we're in an exciting position here. Once again, our license compliance spec will end up with an update to our ISO standard in around 2 years. Our security assurance spec will become an ISO standard in 2023, and that means that our update will probably be an update to that ISO standard 1 year later in 2024. Going back to the beginning, don't forget our current standards are still valid. This is about the future, but it's very important that your voices are heard. We want to make sure that, just like, for instance, our friends at ISO, you can contribute anything you want. And we have had some great input. For example, we've had suggestions on scope from experts in ISO who provided information, comments, and got community discussions underway like this that will help adjust what we do in security and will affect the years and decades ahead. It's very cool. Plenty to do. Now, I wanted to announce that we're doing it and open the door to the work on this call. I don't plan to actually start going through the issues and editing them on this call due to time constraints, because there's something else we must do with education. So on the next call, we are literally going to be walking through issues, and I'm going to be asking you yes or no, what do you think we should include? Because most of that will be held over for the next call, what I'm going to do on this call is just give us a single example. I'm going to pull open an issue and see if we can find a scope comment. I'm going to do here check on Steve Kilbane's work, because he had a few scope comments in play. There we go. Steve looked at our security assurance spec, and he had some suggestions about the type of wording we can use and adjust. There are in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scope suggestions. Okay, let's have a look at what they are. SMK 20, so this is just marking that it was Steve Kilbane, and comment 20 that he sent in. He chose this. He was aligning with the ISO editor's approach to marking their work. He sent that security assurance 3.3.2 and 2.2 customer agreement. Really get customer agreement, that seems implausible. Steve, what was the intent of that, do you recall? Because I just want to pull out what that was.
Yeah, the specification says that effectively it's that you're going to get customer agreement in what you're doing about your security.
And if
Right.
you're delivering a product to, I don't know, more than 2 or 3 customers, and it's a mass-produced product, then that's going to be implausible, I would have thought.
That's a good point. And what I'll do is I'll very quickly pull up that relevant section of the security spec. So we're looking at section 332. I'm just pulling this up. Strange. I don't seem to have that directly under 332. It's possible we're in the slightly wrong place. This is what I've got here on 332. Is it possible?
Well, it's possible it's the result of things are being renumbered as a result of the changes we've made when we're going through the things that weren't to spec, but still,
Absolutely.
sorry, weren't scope.
But that makes sense. Oh, there we go. I'm going back into the 2.2 cited, which is customer agreement. And this is now in definitions. So this means that where we talked about customer agreement, presumably earlier in 332, we did so. We talked about customer agreement, and you're saying that this action, agreement that the process is used to find, track, or fix security issues are regarded as sufficient and correct by relevant customers. Getting that agreement, you think, would be quite a challenge.
Assuming that actually does mean agreement from customers.
Yeah.
Probably it would make sense to have here the requirement that this sort of process is publicly available or publicly defined, so that the customer can use it to make his choice to accept the product. Because this is what we see in many of the coming security approaches, that, for example, CSA and all these sort of standards require you to publicly announce the way you are treating this.
So in this case, we might be looking at aligning, Jan, if I understand correctly, the ask would be to align with what's coming into market anyway, that people have a publicly announced security stance, so that their vendors or customers can decide if they feel that stance is correct or not. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, and then by purchasing, they somehow agree to it, yeah. If it's known before.
Okay. Now, I wanted to pause here and just take people's temperature on this. So getting customer agreements individually might be quite hard, but Jan, you mentioned in what jurisdiction was it again that there might be a mandate that this is required?
Not sure whether it's really a mandate, but it's, I mean, if you look into the CSA, the cloud security assurance rules that they have put, or the C5 from German BSI, all these, they require the organization that want to get towards the certification to have certain kind of vulnerability treatment procedures, and that they somehow at least build or document the interfaces that their customers can use to get this information that is produced by that. For example, the VEX document is introduced as one of these ideas. And so I think if we say you as a provider who wants to publicly announce that he's taking care for security, if he's announcing these interfaces where you can get this information, then it would be a good requirement, because this typically brings people then to the point saying, okay, how do we supply that?
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. Okay, and swinging back very briefly, Steve, I found out exactly where the document is that we need. So customer agreement was cited in the definitions, and then going back to 332, here's where it's cited in the actual document, just pulling it up. There we go. Under 332, it says, for each detection and assigned score, determine and document necessary remediation steps and get customer agreement at or above a previously determined level. So this is about renegotiating with the customers potentially on this. And to your point, Steve, that could lead to a lot of renegotiations as a requirement in the spec, right? Because you have to go back and do it each time.
I mean, I'm just, given that the security spec is to some degree very much derived from the license compliance spec, I was surprised to see this there because it's not something that's in the license compliance spec.
I suppose there's an argument here that we could look at making this a little bit easier, perhaps hanging it on something like publicly declared security stances as a requirement. If people are finding this heavy on what they do.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of where it came from as a requirement?
I believe that was something that came in from Chris Wood at Lockheed.
Okay.
And I think that's where the origin was on that. But what I'm going to do here, I'll just make a note. Just make a note. We talked on the monthly call using ISO standard date. So just a note here that to see if it is difficult in certain markets. I'm putting certain markets here because I'm assuming that for certain others, like defense, it was intuitive for Chris. And if we could or should explore options such as preferring public security stances as a requirement. Okay, so I'm just putting that in as a comment of what we did today, if that's all right. Bang, we put that in. So what we've done now is we've taken a quick look at one of Steve's issues. This is one of, is it 8 on scope? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on scope. We've talked briefly about this one, and there's an action item to explore if the requirement of the 332 is a little bit too heavy for the market or not. And if we regard it as too heavy, we can ease it off a bit in the future generation of the spec to allow more companies to adopt it more easily. This type of call on scope or requirement is fairly normal. We've done this before in the license compliance spec. We've done it which relates to things like who do you need to train around license compliance? We had to adjust some of the language there because some companies, it turned out, simply didn't have the approach that was used in our initial standard. It wasn't because they weren't doing it, they were just doing it in a very different way. We learned from them, we learned from new market sectors, and we adjusted our standard. By the same token here, today we had a look at a comment from Steve about something that might be a little too hard, and we have a note here to go and check if people find it's too hard or not. And if they do, we have a potential resolution. We discuss that with the community, and then we make a call about whether we suggest that is the edited solution in generation 2. And that's how we edit the specs. That's what we do. All right. There'll be a lot more of that on the next call, but it's time to move on from the specs. And just as we do so, big thank you, Mark, for coming in here and helping set the tone of how we approach this. And big thank you to Steve and Jacob for stepping forward in the nomination cycle, and everyone else, if you want to step into the nomination cycle, you can do so in the next week or two. Mark, on one final note, I think I'd just like to say that your patience in gathering all of the contributions for the spec and finessing those scope and requirement changes has been legendary. And without you, we would never have got to the first ISO standard, let alone have a community that was ready to build another one. So our debt to you is incalculable. Thank you very much.
Shane, thank you for your kind words.
All right, guys, it's time to move onwards to education and reference material. Now, first of all, congratulations, Nathan, our new chair. You are the first person to go through our new community-wide election process. Education was the test case for our elections, and Nathan is transitioning into that role. In November, Nathan, you'll be pretty busy. I imagine doing cat herding around the project. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of slides super quickly before handing over to you. These slides are not intended as a demand that education does this, but examples of stuff that education can get rolling on really soon. The path to conformance is something that used to be on our website but needed updating. That has been moved to Markdown, just like pretty much everything else that's important in our project. So the path to conformance is now in Markdown version 1, and it's ready for editing and expansion. The current one you can see has different levels, and it begins to reference different material to address that level. So level 1, basic awareness of like what is open source license compliance, and we have basic training material to help answer that. That's an idea of something that could be useful to do. And just like everywhere else, because we're using GitHub and because we've done this fancy template thing, you can do bug reports or improvement suggestions by clicking a button, and there's a template for you to do everything from describing it to adding screenshots. We just made it super easy. As Jacob said, we're doing Git standards and also Git reference material. We're trying to make everything really useful. There's another thing which is pretty critical that I think maybe education could take a look at. Our FAQ needs work. This is on our website. This, again, has been moved to Markdown. And the thing with our FAQ is that it is beginning to reference the security spec, but it needs a lot more work to talk about the security spec with the same detail as it covers license compliance. So I suggest it could be a super useful win to do so in education. As always, you know, there's open issues and you can create a new issue with the templates. We would love, I think, to be able to update the website with more and more material guiding towards security assurance. Now, another one that might be interesting. We've had a supplier education leaflet out for a long time. It's been out since 2019. It's really popular because it goes from what is open source through to how to use our license compliance standard. Just like our FAQ, this needs some love so that it can turn into a fully grown member of a multi-standard project. It needs to have the security assurance stuff added in. It's in Markdown now as of last week, and it is pretty easy to edit, but there needs to be time placed into it by our community. So help there, super appreciated. Other stuff, our small company playbook, which we released last month on our last call, is in Markdown as well. This means that you can have a look at it and suggest improvements more quickly and easily than ever. So our next iteration should be a lot faster. And that brings us to our medium company playbook. This is what we originally released 2 years ago that got started with playbooks. Our small company playbook, which was released this year, contains text which could potentially be merged into medium company. That work has to be done. So that's another item that education might be interested in doing. Reiterating then, Nathan, welcome. Not on demand, but notes that path to conformance, FAQ, supplier education, small company playbook, and medium company playbook are all items queued up in Markdown and ready for use. In particular, path to conformance, FAQ, and supplier education could probably do with some work to reference our security specification. So that's all potentially in play. And I wanted to hand over to you there to get your thoughts, your comments, your ideas. And I know that you're also looking at other material for the education team to work on.
Yeah, thank you, Shane, and hello to everyone. If we haven't met yet, I probably need to update my picture. But I will say though, this is my favorite area to work on. It's kind of the human being part of this all. You know, I think meaning by that to onboard to OpenChain, you know, humans have to create some change, right? And like web search, like stages of change, and you see, you know, it's a whole process, right? There's like, you know, people need to learn about, you know, what they need to do or learn about there's a possible change, and then they need to kind of think about it and then prepare for it and then actually take some action, right? You can't just go straight to the change. You can't go straight to, you know, conformance here for OpenChain. And so I think our path to conformance does a great job of like, you know, setting those up, right? It helps people, find out about, why, supply chain issues and open source conformance are so important. And then we have other materials that help you, put together a program, right? So you're not starting from scratch. And I think all of these resources are super important for helping people, make their way from finding out about our spec to, actually implementing it in the organization. And so I look forward to working with everyone and making these resources, more available, up to date, easier to read, easy just to pick up and use within your organization. If you're the one championing the move to OpenChain in your organization, these things, should be there for you just to pick up and use. And so, I'm looking forward to serving and helping organize this effort and taking feedback and, all with an eye to bring orgs to, from learning about OpenChain all the way to, being conformant and participating in our community. So in a nutshell, that's me, and great to meet you all. I had a couple questions, and I think Shane, you'd mentioned one of the documents in particular, the supply chain education leaflet. Perhaps if you wouldn't mind opening that up, we can use this as an example to kind of talk about how to work together.
There we go.
Yeah.
So this is the document, and as it's being edited here, there's just notes on what's going on with the second edition commits.
Yeah, and so like the spec, this is a document that we could work on. Here in Markdown, we can work on GitHub. You can create your own, fork of it and suggest changes. You could create issues. But one question I had though is for content like this, I wondered if it also helps to have some sort of like, shared editable, text document, something, multiple people can put comments in, respond to each other. I think, in the past we'd use Google Docs, and I know that's not available in all places where our community's at. We're trying to operate like an open source community, and I think there are some open source alternatives. But wanted to see if anyone found that valuable, or if working on Markdown, seemed like the best option. If anyone has feedback on that, I'd love to hear that. So yeah, please let us know, or throw a message in the chat window, or send a message to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think one thing, Nathan, it's a really good idea to ask people, because we're not totally sure. I mean, we always use Google Docs. We do know Google Docs won't work in mainland China, but I guess another valid question is, for other people, is the Google Doc useful? Because if mainland China, they can only contribute via GitHub, that's not a total block against us also allowing other edit approaches and comments as well. So the real question, as you raised, was what's useful for people, and feedback community would be super useful on that one.
Yeah, and I do think the issues work well for things like the spec, where you want to discuss one point,
right,
in isolation, and you want to kind of drill down into it. Sometimes with documents like this, it's easier if you can redline and you can move things around and show people what your idea is, or if you want to make larger changes, it can help to do that in kind of a more collaborative way. So if people have some suggestions, I'll look into some open source solutions. We may end up still suggesting Google Docs, for the majority of the community. But if people have any ideas, please let us know. Or if you found it, especially if you found an open source solution that works for you, please let us know. I think the other comment I would make too is, for materials like this, we may want to work on Markdown, but at some point, have maybe a PowerPoint version available, or, things that are easy to pick up for, say you're a large organization works with PowerPoint, we want to make it easy for someone just to download something.
So there's a question, Shane, can actually the site of OpenChain be accessed from China?
The site, yes, no problem. GitHub, no problem.
So let's
Google failed.
let's do it in the same way. Maybe that we do it for example, as the 360 website. It's done completely on Markdown and committed directly on GitHub, and automatically generated a web page with templates for the website. So it means that if you open a space inside the OpenChain main site for the workgroups, we do it as using GitHub. That's completely allowed in China. We do it in Markdown. Anyone can test it at home and edit everything without need there. And when committed, officially it built the website and updated in real time. And then it solves the problem for everyone.
All right, let's try and do a offline from this call. Let's look at that as a potential workflow. So I'll contact you, Helio, to
Yes.
talk that through and see what it is.
Yeah, of course.
Looks like we've got 2 cool action items. I'll talk through with Helio and with you and CC, Nathan, about the potential workflow of could we add some stuff directly to our website? And Nathan, I understand that you're going to go and look at some options for live editing, though it's possible we'll use Google Docs. And the copy paste into Markdown is no problem. And just a side note, taking this Markdown and putting it into other formats like PowerPoint or InDesign is going to be super easy. So Markdown is just our master format, and it's super easy to transform into others from there.
If anyone want to see, then at some point in the future, I can actually do a live demo to see how it's happening there on the resulting.
Yeah, that's so Helio, I'm going to sync up with you after the call and begin to work on that with you.
That's a great idea. Thank you. And yeah, so what I plan to do is just to help organize the info, things we're working on, like Shane has done a great job of doing here in these slides. You know, and making sure your feedback is heard. And so please do, you know, send an issue, you know, send an email, you know, whatever works best for you. We will love to have your input. So.
Nathan, thank you so much. And everyone, the end result is we'll be doing live editing of reference material on the next call as well as spec material. So it's going to be busy. Time is tight, so I'm going to move on a bit. Let's have a quick look at our work to support other projects. Deferring onto the next call, we have some open questions. Let's take some time on the next call to discuss these. How do we interlink with OpenSSF? ACT project, that's automated compliance tooling, providing funding for open source tooling for open source compliance, SPDX, and to do group more effectively. In other words, how do we share with them better and how do they share with us better? Let's discuss that on the next call. And I wanted to flag again, we have a big event happening in Japan, the Open Compliance Summit, 7th and 8th of December in Yokohama. This is going to cover license, security, and export control compliance. You will find OpenChain to do and SPDX mini summits. This event is now being prepared for people to go there. You can register and you are very welcome to do so. If you are able to come to Japan, we would love to see you. Please also tell your friends. The event is capped to 100 or so people, so there is limited space, but it has been one of the best networking events for our domain in previous years, and I'm confident it will be the same. Moving on to any other business, we've been working on a description of OpenChain across our mailing lists, and we finally nailed it. There's a clear description of our global working groups, our industry special interest groups, and our local user groups, now in one beautiful, gorgeous, perfect slide. We have descriptions of how they work and explaining slightly more details about their structure. Big thank you to everyone who made this happen. So we had help there from several people with some great support from Steve, Jacob, and Jimmy to bring it across the line. Our meeting is just about to close. I just wanted to put under any other business a correction on one of my slides where I noticed there was one wrong date, and that was to do with the time cited for the update of the Security Assurance ISO standard. The Security Assurance Generation 1 standard will be granted in 2023. The editing of generation 2 will result in an update in 2024. That was an error on my slide. I do apologize for that. And we will be making sure that communication after the call clarifies this as well. Typo on the slide threw me for a minute, but you'll notice on our actual slide about editing the security spec, the dates are correct. Generation 1 will be in mid-2023. The thing we're editing from today onwards, generation 2, will be in mid-2024. Thank you for allowing me to do that clarification. Everyone, thank you for this meeting. Is there any other business to discuss? Okay, if not, we're closing the meeting. Thank you all. I will see you again next month if you're in these time zones. If you're in Asia, I will see you in 2 weeks for the monthly call in that time zone. Please have a lovely day, everyone. The recording will be available within 24 hours. An email with corrected slides will be going out at the same time, along with a small written update. Bye all. Thank you for coming. Talk to you soon.